Inside Florida State Prison, death row reality. Every prison is designed to take away freedom. But one prison in Florida was built to do something even more final. Behind these walls are men who know exactly how their story is expected to end. Every sunrise could be their last warning. Every footstep in the corridor could mean another execution date has arrived. This is Florida State Prison, a place where death is not just a sentence. It is part of the daily routine. And what happens inside these walls is far more unsettling than most people realize. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe if you enjoy carefully researched crime and prison documentaries, and leave a comment telling us where you're watching from. The Fortress at Raiford. Deep in rural Bradford County, Florida, sits one of the most infamous correctional institutions in the United States. Florida State Prison is located near the small community of Raiford, an area that has become almost synonymous with maximum security incarceration in Florida. Surrounded by forests and isolated roads, the prison was intentionally placed far from major cities. Distance itself becomes another layer of security. The prison opened in 1961, replacing older correctional facilities that no longer met the state's growing demands. Over time, Florida State Prison evolved into something much more than a maximum security institution. It became the state's primary execution facility. For decades, some of Florida's most notorious convicted murderers have lived here while waiting for execution. Many arrive knowing they will probably never leave alive. Others spend years, sometimes decades, waiting as appeals slowly move through the legal system. That waiting creates its own kind of punishment. But understanding life here means looking beyond executions. Because long before an execution date is scheduled, another reality takes over. A reality built around routines, silence, control, and survival. And what that daily life looks like may surprise many people. A prison designed for control. Unlike many prisons where inmates spend significant time together in housing units or prison yards, Florida State Prison places extraordinary emphasis on control. Nearly every movement is planned. Nearly every door requires authorization. Nearly every interaction is monitored. Inside the prison, architecture becomes a weapon of order. Concrete walls reduce opportunities to hide. Steel doors isolate individuals. Security checkpoints separate every major section. Correctional officers rarely assume an area is safe. Instead, procedures govern every movement. Before one gate opens, another closes. Before an inmate moves, officers verify identities. The system is deliberately slow. Because speed creates opportunities. And opportunities can become violence. This careful choreography exists because many inmates housed here have histories involving extreme violence. Some attacked civilians. Some murdered police officers. Some committed multiple homicides. Others assaulted correctional staff while incarcerated elsewhere. Managing that population requires constant vigilance. Yet despite all these precautions, danger has never disappeared entirely. In fact, some of the prison's most frightening incidents occurred despite its extensive security. And those moments would permanently change how Florida managed its most dangerous inmates. Who lives here? Florida State Prison houses inmates classified among the highest security risks within the Florida Department of Corrections. Many have received life sentences. Others are serving multiple life terms. Some remain on death row after being convicted of capital murder. These are not random offenders. Admission typically reflects both criminal history and institutional behavior. Some inmates committed crimes that shocked entire communities. Others demonstrated repeated violence after entering prison. For correctional staff, classification is more than paperwork. It predicts risk. Who can safely interact? Who requires restraints? Who can work? Who must remain isolated? Every decision affects safety. One mistake could end lives. Yet behind every classification number is a human being. Some express remorse. Others continue denying responsibility. Some study law. Others spend years reading novels, writing letters, or exercising inside tiny cells. Many eventually become experts in patience. Because time moves differently here. Especially for those awaiting execution. And nowhere is that difference more apparent than inside Florida's death row housing units. Death row. Death row is unlike almost any other housing assignment in the American prison system. Its defining feature is uncertainty. An inmate may spend years appealing a sentence. Sometimes decades. Execution dates are scheduled, delayed, overturned, or reinstated through ongoing legal proceedings. While those legal battles continue, daily life becomes remarkably repetitive. Cells are small. Concrete dominates every surface. Steel replaces privacy. Natural light remains limited. Most hours are spent alone. Meals arrive through secure openings in heavy doors. Movement occurs under close supervision. Recreation follows strict schedules. Medical visits require escort. Legal meetings happen under carefully controlled procedures. Everything operates according to security. Isolation affects everyone differently. Some inmates write books. Others produce artwork. Some become deeply religious. Others withdraw almost completely. Psychologists have long studied how prolonged isolation influences behavior, mood, and mental health. For some individuals, years of limited human contact become an invisible punishment beyond the sentence itself. Yet even within this highly controlled environment, routines continue. Because prisons cannot stop functioning simply because someone is sentenced to die. Every morning begins almost the same way. And those ordinary routines create one of the strangest contradictions inside Florida State Prison. The extraordinary becomes ordinary. Morning begins behind steel. Before sunrise, Florida State Prison is already awake. The first shift of correctional officers enters after passing through multiple security checkpoints. Every bag is inspected. Every officer carries equipment that has been carefully accounted for before the shift even begins. Radios are tested. Keys are signed out. Emergency response teams confirm staffing levels. Inside the housing units, the prison begins its daily count. This is one of the most important routines inside any correctional institution. Every inmate must be physically accounted for. There are no shortcuts. Officers move from cell to cell, visually confirming each inmate's presence. Identification numbers are checked. Cell doors remain locked while the count is completed. If the count does not match official records, movement across the prison can stop until the discrepancy is resolved. Only after the institution confirms that every inmate is exactly where they should be does the day truly begin. For inmates on death row, the morning looks very different from the rest of the prison. Breakfast arrives through a secure slot built into the heavy steel door. The interaction lasts only seconds. An officer unlocks the food flap. A tray slides inside. The flap closes. The door never opens. The inmate usually eats alone, surrounded by concrete walls that rarely change from one day to the next. For correctional officers, these routines are designed to reduce risk. The less unnecessary contact, the fewer opportunities for violence. Every procedure has been shaped by decades of experience. Many of those procedures exist because someone, somewhere, once found a weakness. And in a prison housing some of Florida's most dangerous offenders, weaknesses are lessons learned the hard way. Still, routines alone cannot remove tension. Behind every closed cell door are individuals living under extraordinary pressure. Some have accepted their fate. Others continue fighting through the courts. A few wake every morning wondering whether today's legal mail will change everything. Because on death row, hope and despair often arrive in the very same envelope. Living inside a cell measured in feet. To understand life inside Florida State Prison, it helps to understand just how much time is spent inside a single room. For many inmates assigned to highly restrictive housing, the cell becomes almost the entire world. Every object has a purpose. A narrow bunk. A thin mattress. A stainless steel sink and toilet combination. A small shelf for personal belongings allowed under prison regulations. Perhaps a few family photographs if permitted. Legal documents. Religious materials. Books borrowed from the prison library. Everything else is absent. There is little decoration. Very little privacy. Very little silence. Even when no one is speaking, prisons have their own soundtrack. Metal doors slamming. Radios crackling. Announcements over loudspeakers. Footsteps echoing through concrete corridors. Distant conversations bouncing off steel and cement. Many former correctional officers have described how inmates quickly learn to recognize sounds. They know which officer is approaching simply from footsteps. They recognize meal carts before they appear. They learn when recreation begins by listening for keys. Some even memorize the daily schedule simply by the rhythm of the building. After years inside the same environment, those sounds become a clock. Time itself begins to feel mechanical. But there is another reality that outsiders rarely consider. The mind has very little to distract it. Hours become days. Days become months. Months become years. Some inmates develop strict personal routines. Exercise. Reading. Writing. Prayer. Legal research. Anything to create structure. Without structure, time itself becomes another form of punishment. And while inmates fight boredom, correctional officers fight something entirely different. Complacency. Because routine can become dangerous when people stop expecting surprises. The men and women behind the uniform. Every prison documentary focuses on inmates. But Florida State Prison cannot function without correctional officers. Their work begins before inmates wake and often ends long after the final evening count. Unlike many professions, correctional officers operate inside an environment where every interaction carries some level of risk. A simple conversation can suddenly become unpredictable. A routine escort can become a medical emergency. A minor disagreement between inmates can escalate within seconds. That constant awareness creates enormous psychological pressure. Many officers describe prison work as mentally exhausting rather than physically demanding. The challenge isn't simply enforcing rules. It's maintaining attention hour after hour. Every lock must be checked. Every inmate counted. Every movement documented. Every unusual behavior reported. The smallest detail can prevent a larger incident later. Training emphasizes communication just as much as physical security. Experienced officers often learn to recognize subtle behavioral changes. An unusually quiet inmate. An unexpected request. Someone refusing meals. Someone giving away personal belongings. These small observations may indicate illness, emotional distress, or potential violence. In maximum security institutions, noticing tiny changes can save lives. But correctional officers also face another challenge. Professional distance. They interact with the same inmates for years. Some conversations become routine. Some inmates age dramatically. Some lose family members. Some receive devastating court decisions. Officers witness all of it while maintaining strict professional boundaries. That balance is not always easy. Because inside prison, everyone lives under the same roof. But not everyone lives under the same rules. And nowhere is that difference more obvious than during recreation time. Recreation in a world of concrete. Freedom is measured differently inside prison. For inmates in highly restrictive housing, even an hour outside the cell becomes significant. Recreation periods are carefully scheduled. Security procedures begin long before a cell door opens. Officers search the inmate. Apply restraints when required. Inspect the recreation enclosure. Only then does movement begin. Many recreation areas consist of secure outdoor cages enclosed by high walls and chain link roofing. The sky is visible. The outside world is not. Some inmates spend the hour walking in circles. Others perform bodyweight exercises. Push-ups, sit-ups, pull-ups if equipment allows. Physical fitness becomes more than exercise. It becomes routine, discipline, stress relief. One of the few ways to control something in an environment where nearly everything else is controlled by someone else. Weather changes nothing. Florida's intense summer heat, humidity, sudden thunderstorms, and seasonal cold fronts all become part of prison life. The recreation schedule adapts when necessary, but security remains the priority. For many inmates, that brief period outdoors is also the only opportunity to feel direct sunlight. To hear birds instead of metal doors. To breathe air that hasn't traveled through concrete ventilation systems. Then, almost as quickly as it began, recreation ends. Restraints return. Escorts resume. Steel doors close. The cycle starts again. Yet despite such tight control, prison life has never been completely free from violence. Some of the most serious attacks in Florida's prison system happened precisely because individuals waited patiently for the smallest opportunity. And understanding those dangers explains why security inside Florida State Prison has become so uncompromising. What happened during some of those incidents changed prison policy for years to come. Violence that changed security forever. Even with strict routines, Florida State Prison has experienced serious acts of violence over its history. Correctional administrators often describe maximum security prisons as places where risk can never be completely eliminated, only managed. Many inmates housed here have histories of extreme violence, and some have continued violent behavior while incarcerated. Assaults on staff and inmate-on-inmate attacks have led Florida officials to continually revise security procedures, improve surveillance, and tighten movement protocols. Every serious incident becomes a lesson. If an inmate exploits a weakness, that weakness is examined. If communication breaks down, procedures are rewritten. If equipment fails, it is replaced. Modern prison security is often built on the painful experience of past mistakes. For officers, this means that every seemingly minor rule has a reason. Why are restraints checked twice? Because someone once defeated them. Why are doors opened in a specific sequence? Because another sequence once proved dangerous. Why are escorts rarely rushed? Because haste has cost lives in correctional systems across the country. These lessons are not unique to Florida State Prison, but here, where some of the state's highest-risk inmates are confined, they carry particular weight. The prison's reputation was not built overnight. It was shaped over decades by difficult decisions, evolving policies, and the constant effort to prevent the next crisis before it begins. Yet there is one place inside Florida State Prison where the emotional weight is heavier than anywhere else. It is a room that very few people will ever see. The execution chamber. Florida State Prison is home to Florida's execution chamber. For decades, executions have been carried out here under carefully defined legal procedures. Over the years, the state has used different methods of execution. The electric chair, once known as Old Sparky, was used for many years before lethal injection became the primary method under Florida law. Today, inmates who meet specific legal criteria may also choose electrocution in certain circumstances permitted by state law. An execution day begins long before witnesses arrive. Security increases throughout the institution. Movement is restricted. Additional personnel report for duty. Every step follows written procedures developed through years of legal review and operational planning. For the condemned inmate, the final hours are unlike any other. Attorneys may make last-minute filings. Family members may be granted final visits under established rules. Religious advisors may offer spiritual support. Medical staff remain available. Correctional officers continue their duties with the same professionalism expected every other day. Outside the prison, families of victims often carry emotions that have lasted for decades. Some hope an execution will bring closure. Others acknowledge that no legal sentence can erase the loss they experienced. Families of the condemned may be grieving as well, facing a different kind of tragedy. These moments remind us that every capital case leaves multiple lives permanently changed. The execution itself is only the final chapter. The story began years earlier, with a crime that altered lives forever. And long after the legal process ends, the consequences continue for everyone involved. Waiting without knowing. One of the least understood parts of death row is the waiting. In popular culture, execution often appears to follow sentencing quickly. Reality is very different. Capital cases involve extensive appeals designed to ensure that convictions and sentences comply with constitutional standards. Those appeals can continue for many years. Some death row inmates have spent decades waiting for their cases to move through the courts. During that time, life settles into an almost unchanging rhythm. Meals, counts, exercise, legal mail, medical appointments, sleep. Then the cycle begins again. Some inmates dedicate themselves to studying law, hoping to identify issues that may affect their appeals. Others write letters to family members or victims' relatives. Some turn to religion. Some withdraw into silence. Correctional officers also experience this long passage of time. They watch inmates grow older. Hair turns gray. Health declines. People who once seemed physically imposing may eventually require walkers or wheelchairs. Years transform everyone. The prison changes too. New officers replace retirees. Security technology improves. Policies evolve. But the concrete walls remain. For many people outside, death row seems defined by executions. For those living and working inside it, death row is more often defined by waiting. Waiting for appeals. Waiting for court decisions. Waiting for visits. Waiting for another ordinary day. Or waiting for the day that will no longer be ordinary. The invisible cost. When people hear the words Florida State Prison, they often think only about punishment. But prisons are also places where difficult questions remain unanswered. Can someone who committed an unimaginable crime truly change? Should decades of isolation be considered part of the punishment beyond the sentence itself? What responsibilities do correctional officers carry while supervising people convicted of the most serious offenses? And how should society balance justice, public safety, and human dignity? Florida State Prison does not answer those questions. It simply exists where those questions become impossible to ignore. Within its walls are correctional officers who report to work every day knowing that vigilance protects lives. There are inmates serving life sentences who will never again experience freedom. There are men on death row whose futures remain tied to court decisions that may take years to resolve. There are victims' families whose lives were permanently changed by violent crime. And there are communities that continue searching for justice long after headlines disappear. Perhaps that is the greatest reality of Florida State Prison. It is not simply a place of concrete, steel, and razor wire. It is a place where law, punishment, responsibility, grief, and hope intersect every single day. The walls keep people inside. But the questions raised by what happens there extend far beyond the prison gates. As darkness settles over Raiford, another count is completed. Cell doors remain locked. The lights stay on. Night shift officers begin their rounds. For thousands of people outside these walls, the day is ending. Inside Florida State Prison, tomorrow will look remarkably similar to today. Because in a place built around certainty, the greatest uncertainty belongs to the people who know exactly where they are, but never exactly what tomorrow will bring. Thank you for watching. If you found this documentary informative, consider subscribing for more carefully researched crime and prison documentaries. Share your thoughts in the comments, and until next time, thank you for joining us.